joining me, and you can read their bios inside of your program. I've got beside me Chad Bowie from the Bowie Group. Please put your hands together for Chad. Good morning. And also with me here today is Chris Matthews with CDM Direct Mail. And online with the Koch Company's public sector, my good American friend, I believe he's going to pop up on the screen here and share some stories with us this morning. Please put your hands together for Kevin Gentry. Kevin Gentry. All right, so we're going to get started. I'm going to ask Kevin first just to kind of spend about 5 minutes just to give us a quick overview about maybe why you got into fundraising, how it started, a little bit of background.
Thanks, Larry. It was great to be with you all again and be with my old friend Troy. As soon as I heard the music, I knew it was a Troy Lanigan intro. And Troy and I have been conspiring together the free market conservative movement for a long time, at least 25 years. And my sense was, in order to advance the ideas that we think are so important and help people improve their lives around the world, that we need more resources. And so I decided to study and learn about fundraising because, as Morton Blackwell, the Leadership Institute, coined the phrase, you can't save the world if you can't pay the rent. And it's an enormous constraint to what we can do in terms of what kind of resources fuel the efforts, help us bring on the talent, develop the programs, put on things like this today. And so I've been a lifelong student. I continue to even a conference this past Monday in New York.
Pass one over.
Continually, I'll improve every dimension of this stuff to increase the resources available to our kind of causes. And I would just observe that today, and I think this probably resonates with each of you, that the biggest challenge we face is what's been a challenge for a long time, but it's gotten only more intense. And that is, we live in such an over-communicated society that we are competing every second for our prospective donors' attention. And it's easy to think that what we're doing is so important that everybody we want to talk to is ready and willing to listen to us and give money to us. That's not the way the world works. We have to be able to stand out from that crowd. Just about 10 years ago, the average person was said to have received about 4,000 messages a day trying to get our attention, sell us something in whatever form. It's estimated by Advertising Science that about 10,000 messages each of us receive throughout the course of the day, and our brains are wired to ignore as much as possible because we couldn't survive if we were processing 10,000 messages. So how do we cut through? And that's the number one challenge I look forward to talking to you all about today.
Right on. Thank you very much, Kevin. Over to you, Chad.
Sure. I got involved in conservative movement fundraising kind of by accident, truthfully. I had a friend of mine who worked for one of the larger organizations in the conservative movement, and they had a sudden need for someone to put together I'm going to talk about email today, but someone to put together a direct mail package for them. So I didn't know anything about direct mail, but I was a writer. So I did a quick online kind of crash course, what is a direct mail fundraising letter? And from that, put together a package that actually performed quite well. And after a while, I realized, geez, this is more fun than working for a living. So I started doing that more so and got into digital and really just built things up from there. But what I have found is a couple things. Primarily, there's this phrase that gets used in fundraising, particularly in direct response fundraising, which is that we have to dumb down our content. We have to keep it dumb to get people's attention and persuade them to give. That's not true. The people we're asking for money, for support, Canadians aren't dumb. But what they are is they're busy. And we just heard about that from our prior speaker. They're busy. So it's very important that you know how to cut through the clutter and attract the attention of a busy person. And we're going to get into that today. The other thing that I've learned is our donors want to hear from us. There's this idea that a fundraising ask is a nasty thing or a necessary evil. The people out there who are asking for support, they want to know what we're doing. They want to know why they should give. They want to know what's happening. Asking them for financial support, if you're attaching that to useful information that demonstrates to them how they can advance the causes and values that they care about, they want to hear about that. We should be proactive, we should be aggressive, and we should be sure to be informative in all of our communications, because our donors and our potential donors, they want that information.
Thanks, Chad. Now, full disclosure, it's really early in the morning, and we do not know where our clicker is right now, just so you know.
Oh.
You're allowed to laugh. Somebody has the clicker, right? Oh, and he's dropped his microphone. Another full disclosure here is Chris is going to pick up his microphone and put it back on his lapel for us, because Chris is a little bit nervous this morning, all right? So we are going to make Chris feel very welcome here. Chris is a direct mail guy, so let's make Chris feel real welcome. And Chris, over to you. Maybe just 5 minutes, a little background.
Okay. Well, it's probably not.
Hang on
it's
one
now.
second. You could hear a pin drop in this room, couldn't you?
Okay, so can you hear me now? Okay, good. I got into direct mail by accident, really. Years ago, when I was still in university, I wanted to join the Reform Party, and I did, and get involved with the local riding association. And at one of the first meetings, it was decided, we need to do a newsletter. We need to communicate with our members and raise some money and renew memberships, because this hadn't been done, and the members needed to know that we were still around. So I volunteered to do it, and this was back in the late 90s. So the email and personal computers were still pretty new. So I sat down and we wrote out a newsletter, and I went down to the street. There was a printer that could print everything up for us, and got it all printed, and then mailed it all out, and it did really well. Then my next foray into direct mail came when I moved out west to pursue graduate studies, and I got involved with my local MP's office, and he ended up hiring me, and ended up running his campaigns. And so we needed direct mail for, it was decided we needed to do a direct mail letter for the campaign. And so again, no one else wanted to do it, so I did it. And it ended up doing really well. And then after that, my employer sent me off to the Leadership Institute to, formally learn about direct mail. So I just kind of have been doing direct mail ever since. And it's not because it's something I wanted to do or planned to do, it's just something that needed to be done. And, people need to be communicated with. And, as you can tell, I'm far more comfortable writing people than I am speaking to them. So, no, seriously, like last time I was asked to talk about direct mail was like 20 years ago to the Canadian Alliance.
Now, the reason we asked you, just so you know, the reason I asked you is you're really, really good at it. So
and it went so well that I've never been asked to speak about it since. So, job well done. So, so I've got a lot to say about it, but I'm just gonna step back, and then as the questions come up, then I'll try to answer it. I've got a presentation and some slides and numbers and some interesting things I want to share with you about effectiveness versus efficiency and different forms of solicitation and how different people respond to different types of solicitation. And that's why you need to have more than one tool in the toolbox. You can't just rely on email, or you can't just rely on in-person communication. You have to have a well-rounded set of tools. So I think I'll just leave it at that, and then we'll just, as things come up, then we'll deal with it then. Does So,
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Now sit down
Okay.
and behave, okay? So 30 years of fundraising, and I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is if you don't make the ask, it doesn't work. So there's other descriptive words that people use, but if you don't learn the technique on how to make that ask, you're not going to get what you need. And when you make that ask, you've got to know about timing when to make that ask and do it in such a way that it happens naturally. So not just direct mail or email. So I'm going to switch it back to Kevin. Maybe Kevin, if you could tell me sort of what consequences, and this is because a lot of people say to me, well, Larry, it's so hard to raise money. There's just so many people standing on the side of the street looking for money, all these different organizations. So maybe, Kevin, you could share with us sort of what consequences do you believe the current economic downturn will have on fundraising, and what can be done to address this. Now, just keep in mind, Kevin, too, we've just gone through a national leadership campaign here where it was incredibly easy to raise money. So it's kind of going to be a tough question for you, but go ahead.
Sorry, so fundamentally, I actually don't think it is difficult to raise money, which I will deliver on that in just a moment. But it does kind of come in ebbs and flows, and there are certain environments when it's really good, the fish are jumping in the boat, and the other times it's really trying to figure out where exactly to cast your line. Is that right? But fundamentally, we work with very generous people who are motivated because of concerns for the future. They care about basic principles. They want to do something about it. And if what you're doing in their mind is a solution to the problem, and you've got a plan to get there, you're the vehicle to do it. And so how you go about asking, you're right, is one of those things, being disciplined about it, being smart about it. We can get into that as well. But in terms of these current tough economic times, there are a lot of forces working against us. Inflation, rising energy prices, people who make modest contributions are now wondering if they have enough or will have enough income to put food on the table or to meet future needs, and so they may be looking to cut some of the sort of discretionary spending decisions that they made before, where they'd be making contributions to our efforts. And then, as you all know, we've had some serious supply chain issues, which have made it difficult to get printed material. We have some staffing challenges, finding the talent is always a big issue. All these things, and then if the recessionary times get worse, we've also seen equity markets drop. All these things work against us. But I would go back to what I said at the very beginning. Because we live in a highly competitive space from a marketing standpoint, you've got to stand out. As Seth Godin says, you've got to be that purple cow. If you look like any other cause, or just seem like any other effort asking somebody for money, even so someone who's very well motivated and generous who wants to help you is going to have a tough time distinguishing you from 30 or 40 other charities that they might support. And how are you different? How are you going to deliver on success? And this is where stuff really comes into play. I'm a big fan of the concepts of positioning and branding. I think that probably the two biggest drivers of long-term fundraising success are having a pipeline of new donors always coming in, and then successful marketing and communications. Marketing and communications, in my view, is actually even more important than the product because your image and your exposure and how people see you is everything. Again, especially because we live in such a hyper competitive, overly communicated space. I've actually put together a booklet. It's called The Four Horsemen of Marketing. I interviewed the very famous Richard Viguerie, the sort of godfather of political direct mail, on the concepts that he thinks are important. I'm glad to send you all to these. I know the Postal Service, particularly in Canada, may be a little slow, but I'm glad to try to send these to you. And I'll put in a plug. If you email me at Gentry, letter K, Gentry, at standtogether.org, the organization is called standtogether.org, and ask me for the Four Horsemen booklet, I'll send it to you, and I'll also put you on the list to receive weekly fundraising tips. They're free. It can add to your knowledge on this. I know a number of you already in the audience are subscribed to that. But that's the bottom line is you've got to stand out in a positive way with your prospective supporters.
Right on. Thanks, Kevin. And we'll drop that in the chat for those of you that are online. We've tried to assemble a group of people here, and I do want to take some questions. I'm not a really big PowerPoint fan guy, but we have some PowerPoint slides. I'll leave it up to my colleagues whether they want to use it. But I'm going to sort of segue in as we've got the direct mail represented here. We have email, which I've asked Chad to speak about today. Maybe Chad, just a simple question. I'm always wondering, you hear about all these different algorithms and all the different things that are out there. What's the actually perfect link for an email, like to send and the title so that more people see it?
Really good question. The title's one thing. There's 3 things that matter in an email as far as the getting it opened. There's the subject line. Subject line is the most obvious. And the best way to get a subject line open is to elicit a emotional response. You might want to ask a question. You may want to frame a statement that elicits an emotional response. You may want to give them a preview that what's inside is going to be very enticing or interesting or outrageous. But you got to keep it short. Most platforms now also allow you to enter what's called teaser text. Teaser text is that thing you kind of see 1 or 2 sentences before you open the email. That's a chance to expand on the subject line. So whatever I've put in the subject line to entice that person to open the email, I have a sentence or 2 where I can expand on it. It's not the body of my email. It's not meant to be that. It's a further tease. In direct mail, it would be what might go on the outer envelope. It's that little teaser message. And then what I actually think is the most important thing, more so than the subject line, more so than the teaser text, is the sender name. Real people. The testing has proven a real name, a real sender, is going to outperform, outopen an association or the whatever group or the association for blank or the political party. Real people, real name, increases credibility, increases open rate. This is one of the biggest mistakes that I actually see. I see a lot of emails that are from organizations or from causes, and that's not what direct response communication is. Direct response communication is a person-to-person communication. So I think a real person's name is key. As far as the length of the email, look, jury's out on this. There are a lot of people who are of the mind that it's got to be short. At the same time, we are seeing long copy work, particularly with annual or current donors, people already on your list. My philosophy is kind of in the middle. My philosophy is, with email, as many words as you need to, but no more words than that. So I've written emails that have been 20, 25, 30 paragraphs, and I've written emails that have been 4 or 5 paragraphs or less. Really depends on the subject matter. What's more important than the length is it interesting? Does the end of every sentence make me want to read the next sentence? If it's interesting, they will read. So my rule on length, as long as you need to, but no longer than that.
Excellent. Thanks, Chad. So I'm going to pop over to you here just for a second, Chris. Direct mail, there's a belief out there that direct mail is dead, right? You hear that. Now, the people that are in the direct mail business disagree. Obviously, and I've seen some recent stats on it that quite amazed me at some of the returns that you get from direct mail. And Chad, if you want to jump in here too, after Chris has made some comments, feel free. But and even Kevin too. I know that Kevin's had a lot of experience in this too. What defines a good piece when folks are so bombarded by so much mail nowadays, like that's sent out, Chris? Like what works, or how do you define a good piece of mail?
Well, I guess I'd answer that by just saying that success in direct mail is a function of soliciting the right people on the right issue at the right time. Mm-hmm. So if you get all three of those elements right, then you will succeed. That's the short answer. Is there more you want?
What do you think, Chad, to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's 100% right. The other thing that makes a good piece in direct mail is, you know, a piece that raises money. And the great thing about direct mail and all direct response, I'm sure Chris can speak to this, is it's very testable. You're able to run A/B tests and actually see what works, and then roll out to a wider audience later. My philosophy on direct mail is the pieces that work best are usually, and I'm sure Chris has stats on this, but they're usually longer, they're not shorter. They often include an interesting involvement device. That's something else that we want the donor to do aside from give money, and that really is what entices the response. I'm sure you've seen a lot of them, often surveys, petitions, things like that. And my philosophy is also, the same is true in email, the best direct mail pieces are usually not so pretty, if that makes sense. Authenticity in direct response fundraising is the most important thing, in my view. And with a direct mail piece, and with an email, I think, although there's some debate on that in the industry, but with an email, you really want to give it that person-to-person feel, that person-to-person communication. And real people who send letters don't have graphic design departments in their basements, right?
Fantastic. Kevin, I don't know if you've got some comments you want to...
Sure. And I don't have a whole lot more to add other than that people have been writing the obituary on direct mail for 40 years, and it still is the primary driver of fundraising support. And here's why in sort of a theoretical big picture sense, and then I'll suggest a step forward. The most effective way to raise a contribution, to get a contribution, to receive a contribution for your work is an in-person, one-on-one, eyeball-to-eyeball meeting where you make the request. If you get a meeting with a prospective donor, generally it's as likely as 50% of the time they'll respond positively to your request. Of course, at the meeting first, and they kind of know why you're coming. But that's a pretty inefficient approach. You know, you can only do but so many meetings in the course of the year. You got other things to do as well. You have to match up with people's calendars. You got to make sure they agree to have a meeting. What direct mail does is leverages that in-person meeting. You don't get a 50% response. A lot of people never open the package. They're just not interested for a variety of reasons. But you get enough who self-identify as supporters of your cause, who make an initial contribution, and it's with those that you begin to build a relationship over time that may lead to some of those in-person gatherings where they're giving a lot more. And when you do that multiple fold, it has enormous leverage. Troy mentioned that the Leadership Institute is a supporter and sponsor of this conference. Many of you all are familiar with the Leadership Institute. They're supported by direct mail, and they have increased, I think it's something like 5-fold, the number of people supporting them in the past, less than 10 years, which has tripled their revenue over that period. And the reason is they have a platform. It used to be 10,000, now 55,000 people who are generously supporting them through the mail. Not all of them are supporting them all the time. It took a lot of money, a lot of resources to get to that point, but they're building relationships with potentially 55,000 people. And if only even 500 are the ones who are really generously giving, 500 is a lot more than you could ever meet with during the course of the year. If this piques your interest, there are a lot of great resources. You're welcome to email me. I'll send you a couple of good books on direct mail as well. There are a lot of great resources on how to write the letter, which is a science. It's a complicated thing. But if you're interested in this, it's a great way to leverage what you do.
Thanks, Kevin. So, Chris, maybe over to you just to sort of just close off what you sort of feel the biggest challenges are in direct mail for you as a vendor in the direct mail business right now?
Sure. I just want to build on what was said here too, because there's one thing I've learned the hard way, or from experience, is that there are trade-offs between effectiveness and efficiency in regards to different forms of solicitation. So at the one end, personal solicitation is the most effective form of solicitation, but it's also the least efficient, because there's only so many people you can talk to in a day. And at the other end, you've got electronic forms of communication like email. They're incredibly efficient. You can send out emails to hundreds of thousands of people in the blink of an eye, and the cost is next to nothing. But the effectiveness is nowhere near as effective as in-person communication. So there's a trade-off between effectiveness and efficiency. Direct mail falls somewhere on that spectrum closer to the effectiveness side. It's not nearly as efficient as email, but it's more effective. The response rates are higher. It's not as effective as personal solicitation, but it's certainly a hell of a lot more efficient. You can contact a lot more people through direct mail than you can trying to call people one-on-one every day. So that's, I had a good slide on that, but we don't need to see it, I don't think, but unless you want
Your
to.
turn will come.
My turn will
Yeah, quick show of hands. Direct mail, a lot of people doing direct mail versus email. So direct mail, want to do more direct mail, email? Okay, just trying to see where we want to take this last half an hour. Chad's put together a slide on email, which I think a couple of slides on email. I don't know if you want to share that, but if not, what we can do is just talk about, continue to have that conversation on the emails about, having, being one of those early adopters in the internet.
Yeah.
All the changes that have changed. So things like spam filters.
Right. Maybe let's put it up and we'll just
Yeah.
breeze through it.
Sure.
I won't get too far into anything, but I'll make the slides available to anybody who is interested. The slides will just help me remember all the points that we want to get through, and I tried to be really practical in putting this together. So if you do email, you might find some of it helpful. So maybe we'll just go quickly through it. There's 4 reasons why email fundraising matters. The first, why you should be doing it. It allows you to capitalize on events in real time, in a way a direct mail campaign or a first face-to-face meeting on a large scale doesn't. Texting does this too, by the way, but I don't really think we're there yet. We're there yet with texting in Canada. It opens the door to greater donor involvement. If somebody is responding to your emails, they're more likely to respond to your direct mail, they're more likely to attend your events, they're more likely to take in your whole program. It offers potentially the highest return on investment of any fundraising channel because it is so cost effective and so efficient. And it enables you to test at a very low cost. There are people who say you shouldn't do this, I don't mind telling you that. But I have often, my philosophy is different. I have often informed what I do on direct mail with emails. Direct mail is much more expensive, so you have to be smarter and more targeted in what you're doing. But generally speaking, for me, if something's going gangbusters on email, then I'm inclined to try it with direct mail and take that financial risk. The most important component of email fundraising, and I would argue the same is probably true for direct mail, is you're telling a story. You're always telling a story. It's always designed to elicit an emotional response, and the person on the other end, the person reading your email, reading your letter, that person is the hero. A very common mistake is to make the organization the hero. Your organization is not the hero. Your organization is the vehicle through which the donor, who is the hero, invokes positive change. In addition to telling a story, your email needs to tell me what you're raising funds for, why it's urgent and immediate, very important, the value of the donation, and the intended use of the funds collected. I've got a couple samples. I think what we'll do is we'll just make those available. Designing your email, actually putting it together. If you're an experienced direct marketer, you can experiment with structure and try different techniques, things like renewals and address verifications. There's different techniques you can get into. But if you're not an experienced direct marketer, I've got a formula for you that you should try. First thing, personalized opening. If we have someone's name, use it. People are far more likely to read and respond if it's addressed to them personally. The lead, that first line, first sentence, first couple of words, start with an attention-grabbing phrase, question, or piece of information. Right off the top, you have to tell me why it is urgent, why is it immediate, why is your response needed right away. Tell me a story. Jump into the story. You can pull up my heartstrings, make it emotional. You can make me angry. You can make me question. But tell me a story that elicits an emotional response. Fifth, very important, also a huge mistake, ask for money. Not help, not support, not friendship, money. People are very busy, and it's actually helpful to them if we are very clear on why we're writing them. Explain what you're going to do with a donation. Repeat urgency and immediacy. Sign with a real person's signature. And you might want to include a PS. In direct mail, you have to include a PS. In email, you might want to include a donate button or something else. That formula is a textbook, simple formula for a good fundraising email. And if you're a talented copywriter, you can do that in 4 or 5 paragraphs. 4 C's of email fundraising. Clarity. Be crystal clear. No ambiguity. Don't beat around the bush. Don't be cute. Don't be funny. Particularly our side of the philosophical spectrum, we don't do cute or funny well. Let's not try. Let's be direct. Concise. There's a difference between concise and short. Short is meeting some arbitrary length requirement. Concise is using as many words as possible, no more than that, as I mentioned. Connect the dots. Weave the reader through your email. Whittle the story down to something relatable and emotional. And remember, like all stories, it does have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a hero. And who's the hero? It's the donor. Convenient. Make it easy. Make your links easy to find. Make your landing page simple. And do not link to multiple pages. This is another mistake that frustrates the hell out of me. You'll see an email, you'll see a fundraising email, and it'll say, look at this great media hit we had, or look at this great speech we just gave. Click here to watch it in the first couple of paragraphs. Then buried way down here, it says, oh, if you like this, send us money. Who the hell is going to come back to your email after watching that great speech? One link, donate. I talked about subject lines and senders. Tips and tricks. The prettiest emails don't always work the best. I've seen plain text, very basic. Doug Ford's really good at this, by the way. Plain text emails outperform pretty ones by 3x. Write to a single person using a real name. It's not a form of mass communication. Don't make it feel that way. Keep it conversational, easy to understand. Use contractions, formal words, and avoid formal words. Slang is okay if generally understood. We're trying to write the way people talk. Aim for a grade 8, forgive my typo, a grade 8, a grade right, might work in this room, I don't know, but a grade 8 reading level, and there's a great tool online called the Hemingway app that you can use for that. Again, ask for money, not support or help. Facts can support, like statistics. 95% of people who get this terrible condition need your help. No one cares about that. Use a fact if it enhances your story, but facts aren't stories. Customized landing pages are a great opportunity to reinforce your message or introduce a new element to the persuasive content. Always thank the donor. Always let them know what their gift it means and allows them to accomplish. I really tried to breeze through that, but I think that was kind of the really quick crash course. If you know these things, you should be able to write an okay email.
Yeah, and thanks, Chad. And I know from my perspective, I think I'm at a grade 6 education, so I was able to keep up with everything that you were saying. So before we go over to Chris about some direct mail, Kevin, I wanted to ask you, when we were talking on the phone the other day, you're sort of a big fan of going big. What does that mean to you, Kevin?
Yeah, so everybody we're working with who supports us generously wants us to succeed, or they really wouldn't be doing this. And they want us to see how they want us to make a difference in the world. They're very concerned about the future. They're very concerned for their principals. In the immediate term, they're very concerned about the economy, but they can be concerned about their freedoms, what's going to happen to their children and grandchildren. They're not just giving they certainly are not giving out of need, they perceive that they perceive you have needs, and they're not giving necessarily out of obligation. They're giving as a partner with you to make a difference, to solve the big problem you're trying to solve, to really make the world a better place. And so we can get in the weeds so often in terms of getting additional support to take us through the month, or annual support, or to pay for our operations that we did last year, and maybe 5 or 10% more than we did last year. And that's nothing. What people want to do is they want you to solve the problem. There's a famous story about these philanthropists who were touring a children's hospital in the northeastern United States many years ago, and they went to one of the greatest scientists and said, hey, we have some additional resources that we'd like to give you. If you did, what would you do with it? And the scientist said, you know what, I'd buy another microscope. A guy overheard it, came and said, you know what, if I had those additional resources, I'd find a cure for cancer. Think about the difference, right? Buy another microscope, find a cure for cancer. So if you're trying to do big things, share that with your supporters. Talk about how the world's going to be a much better place if you're able to either stop something really bad or advance something really good. Maybe it's policy, maybe it's candidates, whatever it may be. And lay out that path for how you can get there. With a budget, with a timeline. They already believe in you if they're supporting you. And if they agree with that plan, they believe that you can make a difference, that's the opportunity for them to go 10x, in some cases 50x, what they've done before, because they want you to make a difference. So that's why I think it's the greatest opportunity we have, and it's the greatest thing that we leave behind. So think big in how you're going to take those big plans to your supporters. As the architect Daniel Burnham, who designed Chicago after the Chicago fire, said, think great plans. They're what stirs men's souls.
Right on. Thank you, Kevin. So, Chris, if you want, we've sort of advanced it. I mean, when I was younger, I was involved in a lot of direct mail campaigns because we didn't have the internet back then, and with email, and you see some text that's been done. Maybe you want to share a few of your slides around how easy it really is to set up a direct mail campaign. Share some of that with our audience here today and online.
Okay, but it's not easy. That's the thing. That's why not everyone's doing it. It's far easier to send out an electronic communication, like an email or something, because it's instantaneous and the cost is almost next to nothing. But it doesn't. Direct mail is still a very personal form of communication. Like when you get a physical letter in your hand, that's a lot harder to ignore than hundreds of emails that fill up your email box. And there's much less of it now, so it's even more effective in a sense. Over the last few years, my production's been going through the roof, and I think part of it's because I have less competition. But it is something you can do. The tools are readily available. All you need to do to start a direct mail program is you need a computer, some office software, and a mailing list, and you're off to the races. I mean, that's how I got started. You start small and you work up, and When I first began my business, I didn't even have machines to put the mail together. I had a team of little old ladies that stuffed my mail. And then as it grew, then I invested in machines to do the job. And then as it grew, I got even bigger machines. And so now I'm putting out, I don't know, over 200,000 letters a year. So.
Congratulations. So I guess when I said easy, I was like, yeah, you need a printer. I mean, looking back to my sales days when, I'd send a letter out to truck drivers trying to sell trucks. But we are learning today you do need guys like Chris and Kevin and Chad to write the great letter for you, and then maybe you can send it out to save your organization a little bit of money. What are some of the most common mistakes you see in direct mail and emails, Chad? You touched on it a little bit earlier, so I just wanted to...
Most common mistakes that I see in email, I see too many links we talked about. I see emails that are too pretty and are inauthentic. We talked about the idea that real people don't have graphic designers in their basements. In the direct mail side, we see a lot of people who are writing letters and often forgetting to tell the donors what they're going to do with the money or why it matters. And sometimes we see people forgetting that it's a person-to-person communication. Sometimes you get these direct mail letters, and the charitable world is the worst for this. Sometimes you get these direct mail letters and you can just tell it's a mass communication. Are you referring to me as if I'm part of a broader collective? And that's not what direct response is. It's one person to one person. I could go on for hours, and I'm sure Chris has a lot to add on mistakes. Those are some of the big ones that I see in both. The last one I'll add, and I'm sure I've had this fight with clients, so I'm sure Chris has. The last one I'll add on the direct mail side is letters that are just too short. People pushing short on the client side, because there's typically this idea in modern marketing that something needs to be very short to be effective. And I'm sure that there are certain components of advertising and marketing. I'm sure that that is true in many of these mediums, but it's not true in direct mail, and it's not necessarily true in email.
Anything to add there, Chris? Did you want to add some things?
Just the point that you need to have like more than one tool in the toolbox, because different people respond to different forms of solicitation. And I can illustrate this with a story. When I came to the University of Calgary for graduate studies, two of my professors that I worked with, one would always call me and would always want to do business over the phone, and the other one would always send me email. And I thought it was kind of strange, because like at the time this was still early days in the internet, and I'm like, well, why doesn't he just pick up the phone and call me? And it's just that he was more comfortable with visual forms of communication. And there were advantages to email, because you can see what you're doing, and if you make a mistake, you can change it, and so on and so forth. Where the other one was more comfortable with conversation that he could hear. And this came back to me years later, like when I was doing fundraising. One of my clients does a really good job of keeping track of how different people are communicating to the organization. If they're a direct mail donor, if they're a telemarketing donor, or if they're a website donor. So they just gave me the whole list and said, mail everyone. And so we did that, and I decided to measure how these different forms or how these different types of donors were doing to a direct mail appeal. And what you find is the response rate. Now, these are all donors to the organization, but they just donate to the organization in different ways. So some donated by telephone, some donated by email, some are direct mail donors. and we just mailed them all to see what would happen. And what we found is that the response rates that we were getting from direct mail donors to a direct mail letter was roughly 10 times higher than the response rates we were getting from a telemarketing donor to a direct mail letter. And as well, the average gift rate was significantly higher too. So what do you think happened with the website people or the email donors? They were actually performed more like the direct mail donors. Not as good as the direct mail donors, but a hell of a lot better than the telemarketing donors. And the reason for that is when you get an email, it is similar to direct mail. It's a visual form of communication. You see the words as opposed to hearing it. And it showed very clearly in the results, the response rates and the average gift rates that we were getting from email donors was quite a bit better than what we were getting from telemarketing donors to a direct mail appeal. So it just shows you need to have more than one tool in the toolbox to reach all the people, because different people respond to different forms of solicitation.
Thanks, Chris. Kevin, over to you. You've sort of touched on it a little bit today about some of the challenges we as fundraisers face. Maybe you could share a story of one of your biggest challenges as a fundraiser.
Yeah, well, let me just add or congratulate both Chad and Chris. I think their insights, there's a lot of value packed into everything that they've shared, and I couldn't agree more about the sort of multi-channel marketing approach, that so many of these things are complementary. The emails complement the mail complements the in-person visit, all these complement an event, the website, and when you think about it holistically, it's a whole lot more effective and efficient and productive. I would just share with all of this, if I had one bit of advice to share, and I would, by the way, link back to the point that in direct response, like direct mail and email, because you can measure the response. In this case with email, immediately you can measure response. You can constantly test to see what approach works better than others. And I think it was Chad who talked about how longer letters often do better. That's very counterintuitive to us, right? We think that just makes no sense. Why would a long letter do better than a short letter? But when you test it, you just accept the test results, that even with the additional cost of a longer letter, you're getting a much better response. But all that boils down to, for me, that I have learned so much by just constantly focusing on reading as much as I can on this, some of the classics of marketing from David Ogilvy and Claude Hopkins and Al Reese and Jack Trout, to constantly new stuff that comes out. I mentioned the conference called the Welcome Conference I attended in New York this past Monday about hospitality, to also seeking out mentors, people who've really, walked this path before us and can give great wisdom to help you in your approach. Sir Isaac Newton said, I can see a lot further when I stand on the shoulders of giants. There are many trailblazers who've done this. They're assembled in front of you. There, Troy is another example, so many. And when you develop relationships, friendships with these mentors who can impart their wisdom, you can learn so much over time. So with that, that's the one final recommendation I would give you. Regardless of the economic situation, you want to continually learn on this stuff as much as you can.
Thanks, Kevin. And you've kind of touched on it a bit here this morning. Like, is there a specific book or magazine, podcast, other than what your organization is doing, like a tool, some sort of technique that you would recommend to our audience here this morning?
There are a lot, and I don't want to sound make this about me, because I make these things for free, and I do this because I enjoy sharing the knowledge. But I do have a resources tab on there that you can sort of dig deeper, because there's so many subjects. And if you want to dig into direct mail, there's a guy named Mal Warwick, Ben Hard, who've written some great books on direct response that I'd recommend. If you want to understand more about marketing principles, everything from the social psychologist Robert Cialdini to Jack Trout and Al Reese, who wrote a lot about positioning, Seth Godin. Certainly his blog, a lot of his current stuff is very, very good about marketing. In the major gift space, there's all kinds of stuff from Jerry Panis, Bill Sturdivant. Shoot me an email and I'll try to give you more resources. It really depends on where you want to go in these spaces. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge. And I usually spend, I'd say 5 to 10 hours a week on continually reading new stuff as well as revisiting the classics. It's great to do in a long airline flight, but just try to do it as much as possible. It's amazing. I'm a slow learner. I have to hear stuff like 20 times before it sinks in. And I've learned some stuff today from Chad and Chris as well.
Thanks, Kevin. I know it's always sitting in my mind, and I'm going to put both these young fellows on the spot here. Direct mail, what does it cost? Who wants to take that? Like, what does it cost? What are the costs of doing it, not doing it?
I think I'll leave it to Chris to get into the hard cost. I think he does more production work than I do, so he may be able to give you a better answer. We more do the creative side of things, and I know that right now, particularly, there's so many supply chain issues that I think these costs are fluctuating quite a bit, and it is getting expensive. I would say the cost to not doing direct mail, though, is very, very, very great. It is probably, look at some of these big, I'm sure Kevin's familiar with them, some of these big organizations, these big conservative movement groups in the United States. And I've written copy for some of them. You look at like Young America's Foundation, the Leadership Institute, the Media Research Center. A lot of these organizations, the real bulk of their fundraising is their direct mail program. Getting a direct mail program off the ground does require significant investment, but once you've done that, there's a good chance it's going to become your best source of recurring, sustained, and predictable revenue.
Chris?
You want like an actual number?
No. I wouldn't do that to you, but I guess what I'm looking for is, piece shows up in the mail, this comes to me, what's it cost this program to get mailed out to me? What am I going to have to budget?
Well, typically my letters, the cost is around $2 a piece. That's what I aim to keep it at. And that's like the whole letter, the postage, the whole bit. And then how I do things is, we're doing prospecting. So prospecting is where we're acquiring new donors. And we don't just mail a whole mailing list of tens of thousands of people and risk tens of thousands of dollars or more. We do take a random sample of 1,000 and we send a test letter to them. And then that way, if the test letter absolutely bombs and we don't get a single response back, then at most we're out $2,000. And then if the test mailing does well, then we would mail the rest of the list, however big it is.
Thanks, Chris. You guys look like an eager bunch, so we're gonna ask some questions here today. So I'm gonna need a few of you to have some great questions this morning, so we can kick off this conference just to a whole nother level, right, Chad?
Yeah.
Chad, if there was one piece of advice that you could give, it's probably to stay out of the business, but what would it be?
A piece of advice to who?
Prospects or people that might want to look at for the first time doing one of these type of campaigns.
Do it. First of all, test. Make sure what you're doing. I mean, Chris just spoke about testing. Make sure what you're doing has some data behind it and some information behind it. If you're doing it for the first time, don't try to do it yourself or by yourself. Ask for help. There are people out there who specialize in this, and a lot of people will go, "Oh, I could write a fundraising email, or I can write a fundraising letter," and yeah, you probably can, but there's a lot more science than art, and you should make sure that you know the science or consult with someone who does, if you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck. And I guess the last piece of advice would be prepare to get your butt kicked. but don't be discouraged when you do. Learn from it. There are organizations out there that are still sending fundraising letters that they wrote 5 or 10 years ago. They're just polished up and updated, but the chances are to get to that point where they've got that reliable letter they can mail every quarter or whatnot for a prospecting campaign. Chances are they got their butt kicked a lot before they got to that point.
Kevin, over to you. Anything you'd like to add?
No, I think if you're serious about your cause, I go back to the reason I fell into this stuff too. You owe it to your philosophy to study how to win. That's another Morton Blackwell maxim. And if you really care about this, you want to figure out how to bring in additional resources. If you're serious about this, you want to do it, just as these guys said. And even Larry, as you said about you make sure you ask. You've got to ask in that solicitation. You got to do it. You're going to learn the most from practicing it. But if you marry practicing it up with continual study, you can become an expert. Everybody I know who is a fundraising expert never planned to go into this professional space, but through the schools of hard knocks, got to a place where they're really making a difference.
Thanks, Kevin. And I know, starting out early in my career, asking for money from venture capitalists or angel investors on ideas that you have, that you want to build something or invent something. I was in the software space. It was incredibly uncomfortable. Like it's probably one of the hardest things to do, like public speaking. And then to do it in the not-for-profit space, raising millions of dollars for hospice associations, or even in politics, even on this recent campaign, asking people to make a donation to the candidate. It's hard, and you have to push yourself through. My good friend Troy Lanigan's at the back of the room. He has a microphone. I'm hoping that what we've discussed here this morning has jarred you to ask a few questions. We've got some great talent in this contact space. So over to you, Troy.
Okay. Thanks, guys, and thanks, panelists. Some great information. We got about 10 or so minutes left. If someone's got a question, but I want to start off just a couple things. I was at one of these recently. Just a quick tip to everyone on subject lines that Chad was talking about. Was a great website I found called sendcheckit.com. Sendcheckit.com, and you can put into that website the subject line that you're thinking of sending out, and they send back to you an analysis of how that line might perform and how you might be able to tweak it. It's been a very useful tool for me, and I recommend it to everyone. I want to ask this question to the panelists. I'll start it off, and then if anyone else wants to stick up your hand, I'll come over to you. What are some techniques, some suggestions for prospecting? Now, people often ask this question: where do I find a list to mail? Where do I find an email list to send to? How do I, where do we find large donors that might be interested in our cause, and how do we approach them to get there? So I want to throw that question out to the panel. A lot of people ask about where we get started. What are the resources and lists in order to prospect that can lead to building the kind of house files and donor files that then are part of our supporter base?
Don't anybody go. So I'll go first.
I'll just jump in on the digital space. One of the best ways to prospect and to collect emails is to create engaging content that you can then advertise and promote on social media. I'm sure you've all seen them. Petitions, surveys, electronic birthday cards maybe, or things like that. All of these are data capture exercises that can help you build an email list. And if you're prepared to put a little bit of advertising money behind it, particularly on Facebook, and your content's interesting and exciting, you can collect a lot of email addresses very quickly. I'll let Chris get into more into direct mail, but there is certain things you can do to acquire and broker lists. It's much more common in the United States, but still exists here. I'll try to back up 1 second, only because Troy triggered a comment that I forgot to make about subject lines, just because it's important. It's really, really important that your subject line doesn't get caught in like a spam filter or a spam trap. Email providers, particularly Google, but others are getting really, really smart. And if your email looks like a marketing email, like if that subject line says, click here to win, open this to, if it looks like a contest or it looks like a gimmick or looks like something like that, you're gonna have a really hard time getting your emails delivered into main inboxes and not junk folders and opened. So I just wanted to add that because I wanted to make that point and forgot it, and the question reminded me.
Chris?
So with prospecting lists, any good list should have two qualities. One, the people that you're contacting should be interested in what you're doing. And two, they should have some sort of charitable giving history. Because if they're not donors, they're not going to donate. And I got a story to illustrate that point. Like one time I was working for an organization and we had a political party's membership list. And we decided we would send a prospecting letter to that membership list and see how it did. And we thought, well, these are people that are naturally interested in what we're doing, so we should do well on this. Well, we lost our shirts. And the reason we lost our shirts is they were just members. When we cross-referenced that membership list with publicly available donation data, we were able to find out who the donors were among the members. And then when we prospected those donors from the membership list, that's when we started making money. So, and I guess the second part of that is like, well, where do you get your lists? Well, you can get them from publicly available sources. I mean, you've got elections information is all public, and then you can cross-reference that with white pages and so on and so forth. So that's the hard way of doing it. Another way of getting lists is through collecting petitions and things like that. A couple of my clients are really good. They'll use social media to drive people to sign their petitions. And then out of that, we get full contact information with mailing addresses and whatnot, and we'll try that out. And that sometimes works. And then other times, I've had clients that have organically created petition lists. Instead of using social media and advertising to go out and find people, it was a more passive approach, and they let the people come to them. And then the response rates we got from that group were just through the roof, like some of the best prospecting I've ever seen. But anyway, just kind of getting into the weeds.
Thanks, Chris. Troy, we got a couple questions here?
Kevin, do you want to answer that question also? And the other question to you is how much to ask for? This is another question that comes up frequently at these panel discussions. People don't know, especially when you're before a major gift prospect, you don't know how much to ask, because sometimes you can ask for too little, and sometimes you can be pie in the sky. How do you judge that? Because you've been in front of a lot of people with that question.
Yeah, super. And Chris and Chad, I think, nailed it. I think just, you as you learn how this stuff works, you're going to want to be creative about ways to expand the list of prospects that ought to give to you. And I'll just use this illustration. Many years ago, I met with the founder of J. Crew, and I asked him how he built his business, and he said, well, it was easy. I just rented the lists of all my competitors and sent catalogs to them. And what he was essentially saying is he was utilizing them to have already identified who bought clothing or styles of clothing through catalogs, and so he was going hunting where the ducks are. He was just, doing essentially following the habits of people who already established the habits that he was looking for. And that's the concept sort of at a high level that you want to think through about what kind of list that you want to pursue. But Troy, to your question about how much to ask for, let's say on the one hand, you're talking about a personal solicitation and you have a project and the project is going to cost $750,000 or $100,000 or $3 million. No donor, I don't know why this is the magic number, but no donor wants to be more than 15%, probably no more than 10% of the total cost. They don't want to shoulder the whole load. They want you to find others who will do it. So you can ask somebody if they have that ability to give to maybe cover 10 to 15% of the cost. So if it's $1 million effort and you think they've shown a history of giving in this range, you could ask them for $100,000. Don't want to ask them for the whole amount. If you're asking a broad list of people, that's where it gets tougher, because how do you hit the right number that doesn't turn off some people, but also doesn't give people an aspirational amount? So that's, as you'll know, in direct response, you use a gift stream of anywhere from $5 to $5,000. And again, I would just urge people to dig into the available resources you can find from the Google, to really diving in through other available resources, books and others, blogs, about how to do this in a way that Chris and Chad have been talking about.
Thanks, Kevin. Troy, I think we had a couple of hands and we're running short on time, but
Okay, what I'm
take a
going to
couple
do
questions.
is I'm just going to do a quick round robin. We'll go 5 minutes over time. Instead of each person asking the question, I'm just going to go to the 2 or 3 people that have their hands up, and then we'll leave that with the panel to sort through what they may be able to answer of those. So I'll start here at the back of the room.
Yeah, I just want to know your opinion on using Constant Contact or MailChimp or Nation Builder as a paid one. And then when it comes to direct mail, postage paid return envelope. Is that really important?
Don't answer. I'm just going to run around. These are just final thoughts and questions. Bruce?
So the one thing you guys haven't talked much about is telephone solicitation. And I'm just wondering, it's the one area that gets the biggest negative response, I think, from potential donors. And I'm curious if you think that's something that's not necessarily part of the toolkit anymore, or if it's still really important.
Okay, who else had their hand up? We'll just do 2 more quick, and then we'll leave it with the panel, so just make mental notes.
My question was just very quickly about titles. I just find, generally speaking, the Mr. and Mrs., first name versus name, all that kind of stuff. I'd like to get some feedback on how things are going forward with titling.
Okay, last one. I hope you guys are remembering all these.
I'm interested to know whether you write differently when you're a not-for-profit versus a charity.
Okay, I'll leave those. Larry, you stick handle those, and then we'll wrap it up at the end.
Okay, so just Bruce, so you know, I used to be in the telemarketing business back in the day, sold vacation ownership and timeshare here in Canada. We made millions and millions of calls. There's a certain percentage of people that don't like getting called, but it is very, very successful. Over to you.
Yeah, I don't do telemarketing, but I know a lot of it still happens. So my general thought is, if someone's doing a lot of something, there's probably a good reason for it.
I remember 2 of the questions, I think. So the one about the return envelopes, using postage paid return envelopes, yeah, that's what I use. The other options are, you could just send a blank envelope where they would have to put their own stamp on it, or you could send them a return envelope that already has the return stamp on it. You just got to test and see what works. And like for the number of people I'm mailing and the response rates and whatnot, the business reply, the postage paid business reply envelopes are what works for me. And I've tested everything, but that's for me.
Thanks, Chris. Hang on, Kevin. We're going to give you last thoughts. Chad had a couple of things.
Just
pop
2
up.
more questions I remembered. As far as whether you should be using MailChimp, Nation Builder, Constant Contact, any of these tools, honestly, I wish I could give you a concrete answer. The answer is kind of, it depends on what your organization's actually doing with the data. And frankly, I work with a partner who's much more versed in those things than I am. So what I'm going to suggest is, if you want to have a fuller conversation about it and get some more fulsome advice, just contact me and I'll be happy to help. But I can't really answer the question without knowing more what you're doing. As far as, do you write differently for a not-for-profit versus a charity? My philosophy is you write differently for every set of donors. Every organization is different, and every set of donors are different. And a good copywriter will take the time to learn the nuances.
Kevin.
Yeah, when we say test it, it's not a cop-out. We really mean the more you test, the more you know, and it's even going to be unique for you. MailChimp, stuff like that. I love the fact that you can read results and you can see results and you can compare it to past and you can test subject lines and things like that. So yes, but to your question about return address postage or even email services like that, it depends on the nature of your donors. You know, you've heard of the 80-20 rule. 80% of your resources come from 20% of your supporters. It's really more like 90-10 or 95-5 or even 98-2, that, you know, 98% of your resources come from 2% of your supporters. So here's the challenge. You want to treat your best donors really extra carefully. They are the ones you may want to give the stamped return address envelope. You want to send them a more personal email if possible because of the nature of them. But you don't want to ignore all the others, and you've got to figure out an efficient way that doesn't, you know, you don't drown in all the stuff or trying to personalize it. You use systems to address that, but you also think through it in such a way that you're kind of processing them through the pipeline so that they're becoming your major supporters. So I hope that makes sense, but it's really a constant balancing act. And I would just say, just as we've all been saying, the more you do this stuff, and keep reading, keep studying, keep going to things like this, but the more you do it and match it up with what you're reading, the more you're going to develop your own knowledge, and you're going to continue to do better testing, and you're going to get a better sense of what works for you.
Thank you, Kevin, and thanks to our panelists. Note all three of these people are available to you to network with after this session tomorrow, next week. Having been in this space and lots of different verticals, it's really important that you reach out to these folks and make some money, raise some money. Best question you can get is, how much money can I give you, Larry, so you'll quit talking to me? That's the best question you can get. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you.